A 52-year-old man showed up to fix a fence. He drove a 15-year-old truck with a broken heater. Brought his 9-year-old daughter because school was closed. The property manager looked at him like he was nothing. Just another tradesman, just another paycheck. What they didn't know. James Anderson had designed the levee system that saved 11,000 homes after Hurricane Ida. He'd walked away from a 6-figure engineering career, not because he failed, because his daughter needed a father who was present. So he chose fences over bridges, chose small-town Colorado over international contracts. And the woman who owned that fence? She owned the entire town. $400 million, 12-bedroom mansion, and the loneliest life you can imagine. What happened when she watched him hand his daughter a paper bird folded at a red light? That moment changed everything. This is the story of a man who built foundations, not for buildings, for people, and why the smallest choices create the structures that last. The morning James Anderson drove his rusted pickup down the long gravel road toward the Hart estate, the sky was the color of an old bruise. Purple, gray, stubborn, holding rain it hadn't decided to release yet. He had his window rolled down despite the cold, because the heater on the passenger side had stopped working 3 winters ago, and Emily always sat on the passenger side. She was 9 years old. She deserved warm air more than he did. That was the kind of math James did every single day without thinking about it, without calling it sacrifice, without calling it anything at all. Daddy is the lady rich. Emily's small face pressed against the glass, watching the white fence posts that lined the road, or what was left of them, rotted at the base, split at the rails. The kind of neglect that happens when property is an asset, not a home? I expect so. How rich? He thought about it. Rich enough to have a fence this long and not notice it's broken. Emily nodded like that was a complete answer. He loved that about her. She had her mother's eyes, Rebecca's eyes, and Rebecca's ability to accept a thing for exactly what it was. No more, no less. Rebecca had been gone 5 years now. A car accident on a wet highway outside of Littleton. And James had rebuilt himself around Emily the same way he rebuilt everything else in his life. Slowly, carefully, without complaint, making sure the structure would hold. He pulled the truck to a stop near the main gate, where a man in pressed khakis and a company polo was waiting with a clipboard. The man's name was Stephen Collins. James didn't know that yet. He would learn it soon enough, and he would not forget it. You the handyman? Stephen didn't look up from his clipboard. James Anderson. I do structural repair, fencing, framing, foundation work. James stepped out of the truck. He was not a large man in the way that gets attention, not broad-shouldered or barrel-chested. But there was something in the way he stood. A stillness, a readiness, like a tool that's been set down but not put away. Right. Stephen marked something on his clipboard. We need the north perimeter fence repaired. All of it. Posts, rails, hardware. We've got a property event in 11 days, so the timeline is firm. I'll take a look at the scope and give you an honest estimate on the timeline. Stephen finally looked up. He looked at James. He looked at the truck, 15 years old. One cracked tail light. A toolbox in the bed that was organized with a neatness that didn't match the vehicle. He looked at Emily, who had climbed out and was standing quietly beside the front wheel, holding a small, worn notebook she carried everywhere. You brought your kid schools on a teacher workday. She's well behaved. She won't be in the way. This is a private estate, not a daycare. James held the man's eyes. She's my daughter. Where I work, she's welcome to be. If that's a problem, I understand. And I'll return the call to whoever hired me and let them know the job's unavailable. The silence stretched. A crow called somewhere in the tree line. Stephen made another mark on his clipboard. Just keep her out of the main house and away from the garden. Miss Hart has a specific vision for the property. James nodded once. That was all. They walked the fence line together, James, Stephen, and Emily, who stayed close to her father and made small pencil marks in her notebook, drawing what she saw the way she always did. Quietly cataloging the world, James crouched at intervals, testing posts, pressing his thumb into the wood to feel the rot, sighting down the line with the practiced eye of a man who had once read structural blueprints for a living, and had never entirely lost the ability. He said very little. When he spoke, it was precise. He used terms that made Stephen pause once or twice, recalibrate, look at him slightly differently, and then look away as though the recalibration was inconvenient. They were halfway down the north line when the second truck arrived. Black, new. It parked near the main gate with the confidence of something that had never worried about parking. The man who got out was named Brian Walker. James would learn that too. Brian was 28, thin through the shoulders, and wore the efficient anxiety of a man who had spent his career managing other people's expectations and never quite meeting his own. He walked directly to Stephen without acknowledging James. What's the situation? Single tradesman. Small outfit. Local referral. He seems competent enough. Brian looked at James the way a man looks at furniture he's considering moving. You got a company? License? License. Bonded. Sole proprietor. James Anderson Structural Repair, sole proprietor. Brian said it like it was a diagnosis. You got any commercial project experience? Because this isn't a backyard deck. I've worked larger scopes. Like what? James paused, not because he didn't have an answer, because there were several answers and he was choosing between them. The way you choose between tools. Not by what's most impressive, but by what's right for the job. I've done my share of complex work. I can walk you through my assessment of the fence line, which is what you're paying for. Brian smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Listen, friend. Miss Hart has guests arriving in 11 days. Senators, a federal judge, a few people whose names you'd recognize. This fence is the first thing they see. I need to know I've got the right man on the job. Then look at my work. I'll show you better than I can tell you. See, that kind of answer works at a county fair. Not here. The words landed in the air like something dropped from a height. Emily had gone very still beside James. She was watching her father's face. James knew she was watching. He breathed slowly through his nose. He let the silence belong to him. Mr. Collins, Stephen Collins. And this is Brian Walker, Miss Hart's assistant. Mr. Collins, James said it without inflection. I drove 40 minutes to be here. I walked your fence line and I know exactly what it needs. I can have the materials quoted and a full work schedule on paper within the hour. That's what I came to do. He paused. If you've got a different tradesman in mind, that's entirely your call. Stephen stared at him. James stood in it the way a well-built wall stands in wind. Unmoved, not indifferent, just grounded. Stephen turned to Brian. Get his quote. If it's reasonable, we'll proceed. He glanced at Emily once, not unkindly, but the way you notice something that wasn't scheduled, and walked back to his truck without another word. James watched him go. Then he reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, and handed it to Emily. He'd made it that morning. A paper bird folded at a red light on the way over. She'd asked him to make her one the night before, and he hadn't had time. She took it with both hands, tucked it carefully into her notebook, and up on the second floor of the main house, behind a window that caught the gray morning light like a frame around a painting, a woman stood with a coffee cup cooling in her hands. Watching, she had seen the whole exchange. She'd watched James hand his daughter the paper bird. She'd watched the way the little girl held it with two hands, like something precious. Victoria Hart had owned most of this town since she was 27. She had negotiated with men twice her age and never flinched. She was not, by any honest measure, a sentimental woman, but what she'd just seen made her set her coffee cup down very carefully, as though the action required her full attention. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know his story. She didn't know about the engineering degree in a cardboard tube in his garage, or the citations in a folder he never opened, or the levee in Louisiana that had his calculations in its bones. She didn't know about the quiet years, or the long drives, or the child sleeping in the next room, who was the whole and total reason he had chosen this smaller, harder, truer life. She just knew, the way that some people know some things before the mind catches up with the knowing, that the man in her driveway was not what anyone around him seemed to think he was, and that the way his daughter looked at him, with that quiet, absolute certainty, the way you look at something load-bearing, was a thing she had never once experienced in her own life, and did not know how much she needed until this exact moment. Down below, James opened his tailgate, pulled out his legal pad, and went to work on the estimate. He did not look up at the window. He did not know she was there. He was thinking about post-hole depth, concrete cure times, the weather rolling in from the west. The estimate took James 93 minutes to complete, which was faster than it should have been, and more thorough than anyone in that carriage house office was prepared for. He sat in the cab of his truck with the legal pad across his knee. Columns neat, numbers precise, material quantities calculated to the nearest board foot, with allowances for waste, weather, and the kinds of complications that only men who have actually done the work know to account for. When he finished, he clipped the pages together, read through them once, and made 2 small corrections with the focused attention of a man who understood that the quality of a plan is the first argument you make before you ever pick up a tool. His father had told him that Roy Anderson, who had run a 2-man roofing company outside of Denver for 30 years, and had never once delivered an estimate that wasn't better than what the client expected. Roy had been a plain-spoken man with rough hands and a library card he used every week, and James had inherited from him an understanding that could not be licensed or certified. The understanding that the gap between a good craftsman and a great one is almost never skill. It is almost always attention. James missed his father every day, not with noise, just with a kind of low, steady awareness. The way you're aware of a load-bearing wall even when you're not looking at it. Roy had died 6 years ago, just before James moved to Millbrook, and had not lived to see his granddaughter raised by a single father who drove a battered truck, and had traded a continent-spanning career for a house on a gravel road and a daughter who drew fence lines from memory. James thought sometimes that Roy would have understood. Roy had always understood the things that mattered. He climbed out of the truck and walked to the carriage house office. Emily came with him, notebook under her arm, pencil tucked behind her ear, the way she had started doing recently, which made her look startlingly grown up in a way that occasionally caught James off guard. She was 9. She would be 10 in February. He was aware, in the precise way that fathers who pay attention are aware of every incremental shift in her, the way she'd started asking harder questions, the way she read books that were too old for her without struggling, the way she occasionally looked at him with an expression that was patient in a direction he found deeply moving, as though she were already preparing in some small way to take care of him someday. He did not need taking care of. He was fine. He was always fine. But he noticed the expression. He filed it away. Stephen was on the phone when they came in. He held up one finger. James stood. Emily found a chair and sat in it and opened her notebook. James did not check his watch, did not shuffle, did not look around the room with the transparent frustration of a man performing patience. He simply waited. He had spent years learning the difference between waiting as submission and waiting as choice. What he was doing now was a choice. 4 minutes later, Stephen got off the phone, took the estimate without apology, and began to read it. James watched him read it. He watched the moment Stephen hit the page where James had broken down the concrete sequencing and mapped it against a proposed 11-day schedule with parallel work tracks clearly marked. Watched Stephen stop. Go back to the beginning. Start again more carefully. This is detailed. It's accurate. You separated the concrete reset from the post-replacement. They have different cure time dependencies. You need to know what can run parallel and what has to wait, especially with an event deadline. Stephen looked up. Most contractors just give me a total and a rough completion window. James said nothing. He had found over the years that silence was often more eloquent than explanation. Mr. Collins will need to review this. That's fine. There was a pause. Small, real, in which Stephen seemed to be doing the same quiet recalibration he'd done on the fence line. We'll be in touch. James nodded. He turned to Emily. Let's get lunch. She slid off the chair and took his hand. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. They were halfway across the gravel lot to the truck when Stephen spoke. Anderson, just the name. Just the particular tone of a man who had never developed the habit of adding please. James stopped. He turned. Stephen stood near his black SUV, with a jacket folded over one arm and his phone in the other hand, and the expression of a man who had reached a conclusion he wasn't entirely comfortable with. He walked over slowly, taking his time, which James recognized as a dominance gesture and chose to find neither impressive nor offensive. I looked into your license history. Brian pulled it up. You've been a sole proprietor in Millbrook County for 6 years. That's right. Before that, nothing in the state registry. He studied James with the focused attention of a man used to assessing risk. Where were you working before Millbrook? Other states. International work for a time. What kind of international work? Infrastructure, civil engineering projects. The word landed, and Stephen absorbed it without showing much. But James saw something move behind his eyes. What firm? I was with Bridgepoint Engineering Corporation for 6 years. Before that, I did a 2-year rotation with a humanitarian infrastructure nonprofit. building water systems and load-bearing structures. In regions that don't get commercial contractors, Stephen was quiet for a moment that stretched in an interesting direction. Bridgepoint Engineering Corporation. That's a serious outfit. It was good work. Why'd you leave? James looked at him directly. Personal reasons. And then you came here to fix fences. To raise my daughter. James said it simply. Finally, the fence work follows from being here. That's the whole of it. Stephen stared at him. This time the stare was different from the one in the field. Less performance. More actual thought. You walk a fence line like a man who's read blueprints for a living. I have. Another pause. Stephen looked at Emily, who was standing at James's side with her notebook held flat against her chest. Watching Stephen with the calm, interested expression of a child who has spent her whole life listening to adult conversations and processing them with more accuracy than the adults involved would believe. I'll review the estimate personally. You'll have an answer by end of day. He turned and got in his SUV. James watched the truck go. Then he looked down at Emily. He doesn't know what to do with you. She said it matter-of-factly. Most people don't. Is that bad? He thought about it honestly. No. It just means you make them work a little harder than they planned to. She considered that. I think that's good. He opened the truck door for her, closed it after she climbed in, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. He adjusted the mirror. He put the truck in gear. The answer came at 4:30 that afternoon, while James was in the garage workshop at home. Showing Emily how to use a hand plane on a piece of scrap oak, Stephen called. The estimate was approved with one modification. They wanted to add a second run of fence on the east property line that hadn't been part of the original walk. James said he'd be there at 7 sharp. He hung up and looked at the small curl of wood that had come off the oak under Emily's first attempt with the plane. It was uneven. Too much pressure on the heel. Agon, let the tool do the work. You're fighting it. She repositioned her hands. Like this? Relax your shoulders first. She did. She drew the plane down the board. The curl that came off this time was long, even, almost translucent in the workshop light. She looked up at him. He nodded. That was enough. That was always enough between them. What James did not know. What he could not have known. In the particular blindness that comes from being someone who has long since stopped thinking of himself as a subject of other people's attention, was that Victoria Hart had not approved the estimate because of the fence. She had approved it because she had asked Stephen to tell her who the man was. Stephen had told her what he'd found. She had sat with that information for a while, in the quiet of her office, with the paper bird in the corner of her desk. Then she had added the east fence line to the scope. Not because it needed repair. It was in decent shape, actually. She had added it because 11 days wasn't enough time. She wanted more time. She did not examine that want too carefully. She was a practical woman. She told herself it was curiosity. She told herself it was due diligence on the property manager's part. The paper bird sat in the corner of her desk. Outside, the evening settled over Millbrook like a long, slow exhale. James made soup. Emily set the table. They ate together in the small kitchen. And afterward, James read to her. She had recently graduated to longer books. And they were 3 chapters into a novel about a lighthouse keeper's daughter that she had selected herself from the library. And then she went to bed. And James sat at the kitchen table for a while with a cup of coffee. Looking at nothing in particular. He was tired. But it was the good kind. The kind that means you have used the day for something real. He thought about the east fence line. He thought about the concrete schedule. He thought about the weather window. He did not think about the woman in the window. He didn't know she'd been there. He finished his coffee. He washed the cup. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed in the house he had made into something livable, in the life he had made into something honest. And he slept the deep and quiet sleep of a man who has earned it. The work began on a Monday. James arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes before agreed start time, for the simple reason that he had never in his adult life shown up to a job exactly on time. Punctuality, his father had said, is the cheapest form of respect there is, which means there's no excuse for not giving it. James had absorbed this at 16 and had not questioned it since. He backed the truck to the north fence line, cut the engine, and sat in the clean, cold silence for a moment, not procrastinating, but doing what he always did at the beginning of a large job, letting his mind travel the full scope of the work, from start to finish, identifying the sequence, the dependencies, the points where the plan would meet reality and have to flex. It was a habit from his engineering years. He had never stopped doing it, even here, even for a fence job. The sky was high and clear and blue in the particular way that October skies in this part of the country are blue. Not soft, not pastel, but hard and bright and serious, like a sky that has made up its mind. Emily was at school. He dropped her at 7:15 with her lunch. Turkey sandwich cut diagonally because she had informed him at age 6 that food tasted better that way, and he had cut it that way every day since. Without comment or exception, her teacher, Mrs. Garfield, had mentioned once at a parent conference that she had never seen a father pay such close and consistent attention to small details. James had thanked her and driven away without elaborating. He wasn't paying attention to small details. He was paying attention to his daughter. These were not to him the same thing. He had the first section of posts out of the ground by 9. The rot ran deeper than the surface suggested. It always did in fence posts that had stood too long in soft ground, and James adjusted his depth calculations accordingly, adding 18 inches of fresh concrete to each reset post. This was not in the original estimate. He would not charge extra for it. He would at the end of the job document it in a brief completion note, so that whoever managed the property going forward would know what had been done and why. That was how he operated. Not because anyone required it. Because it was right. Stephen came by at 9:30 with a mug of coffee he didn't offer to share. Looked at the line of removed posts. Looked at the stack of replacement cedar. Made a mark on his clipboard. "You're ahead of schedule." He said it with the faint surprise of a man who had learned not to expect much from sole proprietors. "I'll be further ahead by lunch." James went back to work. It was quiet work mostly, the kind that asks a man to be alone with himself for hours at a stretch, and either finds him wanting or proves him sufficient. James had always been comfortable in quiet. It had not always been true. There had been a period after Rebecca when silence was not restful, but corrosive, when the absence of noise became a presence of its own. Heavy, particular, filling the rooms of the small apartment they'd shared, and the cab of his truck and the space behind his eyes at 3 in the morning. He had learned slowly, and without help from anyone who had a name for the process, how to convert that silence from enemy to companion. It had taken most of the first year. By the second year, it was manageable. By the third, it was his. He thought about Rebecca sometimes on long work days, not with the raw, disabling grief of the early years, but with the quiet, durable acknowledgement that she had been real and gone, and that the best thing he had from her, the only thing that truly mattered, was 9 years old, and drawing in a notebook at a desk in a classroom 6 miles from where he was standing. He thought, "I am doing okay by her. Not great, not perfect. But okay." That thought on most days was sufficient. He set 8 posts that day. Every one of them was plumb. Every one of them was level. Every one of them was set 2 inches deeper than the minimum specification, in concrete mixed to the correct ratio, in holes drilled clean and true. No one saw this work being done. No one witnessed the precision of it, or understood what it said about the man doing it, or recognized in the care of the execution the particular form of integrity that cannot be faked and cannot be taught, that can only be lived day after day in the absence of recognition, for no other reason than that it is the right way to do things. That evening, when James pulled up to the school to collect Emily, she climbed into the truck and immediately said, "You smell like concrete. I set 8 posts today, good ones. The best I know how to make." She buckled her seatbelt. She opened her notebook. She turned to a fresh page. "Tell me about them." And he did the whole drive home, because Emily was the only person in his life who ever asked. And because a man who works alone in the silence and the cold for no applause and no recognition still deserves at least one person who wants to hear about the 8 posts. He had that person. Some men in this world have everything and are still hollow. James Anderson had one small person in the passenger seat who wanted to know about the concrete. He was not hollow. He was not anywhere close. Day 6 of work came with the kind of October light that makes promises it can't keep. Bright, clear. Cold underneath. James finished the north fence line 2 hours ahead of schedule, which meant he was now a full day ahead of the original contract date, which meant Stephen Collins showed up at 10:30 with his clipboard and an expression James couldn't quite read. "You're done." Stephen walked the line slowly, testing posts with his palm, sighting down the rails, looking for the flaw he'd been trained to expect and wasn't finding. I am. A week early, day and a half early. I said Thursday. It's Thursday. Stephen made a mark on his clipboard. Miss Hart will want to see this. He pulled out his phone, typed something, put it away. 3 minutes later, Victoria came around the side of the main house. No coffee this time. Just her hands in the pockets of a navy jacket that looked expensive in the way that expensive things do when they're trying not to. She walked the fence line the same way Stephen had, slower, more thorough. She stopped at the 8th post, crouched, ran her hand along the base where the concrete met the wood. You went deeper than spec. James came to stand beside her. 18 inches. The rot ran further down than the surface showed. It always does in soft ground. This wasn't in the estimate, no. You're not charging for it, no. Why not? Because it needed to be done. And because whoever manages this property going forward should know what's underneath. I'll document it in the completion note. She stood, looked at him with an expression that was part assessment, part something else. You do this on every job. I do, even when no one's watching, especially then. The words sat in the air between them. And Victoria did something she almost never did, in the presence of contractors or staff, or anyone whose opinion of her required management. She smiled. Not the controlled professional version, the real one. It's beautiful. She said it like the words surprised her. It's plum. But there was something in his voice that allowed the compliment. Stephen cleared his throat. I'll process the final invoice. We'll have payment to you by end of week. Actually, Victoria turned to Stephen. I'd like to add the east property line. The section we discussed last week. Stephen's eyebrows went up a fraction. That wasn't in the original scope. I'm aware. Can we add it now? Stephen looked at James. Can you start Monday? I can start tomorrow if the materials are here. They're here. Then tomorrow's fine. Stephen made another mark. Walked back toward the carriage house with his phone already to his ear, which left James and Victoria standing beside the fence line in the October light that was starting to lean toward noon. You didn't need the east line repaired. James said it quietly, not as an accusation, just as a fact. Victoria looked at the fence, at the house, at the mountains in the distance that framed the property like a postcard no one had bothered to send. No, then why add it? She took a long time answering. When she did, her voice was different, lower, more honest than he'd heard it before. Because 11 days wasn't enough time. Enough time for what? She looked at him. I don't know yet. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just full. Your daughter Emily. Stephen found another drawing yesterday. It fell out of her notebook near the gate. What did she draw? You working on the fence. From the side angle. The perspective was perfect. The proportions. The way you were kneeling. She got the light right. She sees things clearly. Victoria reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to him. I thought you'd want it back. James unfolded it. Emily had drawn him mid-swing with the post-hole digger, the angle of his shoulders, the compression in his knees. The tool caught at the top of the arc before the downswing. It was him, exactly him, in a way that suggested his daughter had been watching very carefully. She drew me. She draws what matters to her. How do you know what matters to her? Because I've spent 8 days watching her watch you. James folded the paper carefully, put it in his shirt pocket. Thank you for keeping it. Victoria nodded. Then, can I ask you something? You can ask. Do you miss it? The engineering work, the big projects. He thought about it the way he thought about all honest questions, with care. I miss the problems, not the job. The problems were real. They had scale. When you solve a structural problem at that scale, there's a satisfaction that's hard to replicate. But you gave it up. I gave up the job. The thinking didn't go anywhere. He gestured at the fence. I used more structural analysis on this fence replacement than most people would. The scope document, the sequencing, the concrete specifications. He paused. You work with what you have. Dumbs that make you sad does what make me sad. Working smaller than you're capable of. He looked at her with an expression that was not unkind, but was very direct. I'm not working smaller than I'm capable of. I'm working exactly as large as I want to. There's a difference. Capability is not the same as obligation. She held his gaze. Most people would have stayed. In the career. Found a way to make the family situation work around the job. Most people don't have the same daughter. The silence that followed was long and full, and neither of them moved to fill it. A bird crossed the sky above the fence line. The wet cedar smell of fresh-cut wood moved on the light wind. She's lucky. Victoria said it quietly. James shook his head. No, she's not lucky. Lucky implies chance. I chose her. Every day I make the same choice. That's different from luck. Victoria looked away down the long straight line of the repaired fence. She was quiet for a while. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She just turned and walked back toward the house with her hands in her jacket pockets and her head slightly bowed. And James watched her go, in the way he had begun to watch her, with attention, and with something underneath the attention that he had not yet examined. Saturday afternoon, Emily asked to go to the library, which was how they ended up in the Millbrook Public Library at 3 o'clock under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly unwell. Emily went directly to the children's section. James got coffee from the machine by the front desk. 50 cents. Terrible coffee, but warm. And the price point was something he respected. He sat at one of the long tables near the reference section and pulled out the completion documentation for the north fence line. He worked for 20 minutes. Then Emily came back, not with books, with her notebook open and an expression on her face that James had learned to read in the way fathers learn to read their children when they pay attention. Something was wrong. What is it? Daddy, does the fence lady own everything? James set down his pen. What do you mean? Emily put the notebook on the table, turned to a page where she'd written a list in her careful 9-year-old handwriting. I went to the history section to see if there were books about fences, and I found the town records. She pointed to the first item on her list, Millbrook Town Hall. Hart Foundation donor plaque. Established 1952. She pointed to the second, Millbrook Public Library. Founded by Hart Family Trust, the third, Hart Elementary School. Where I go, the fourth Hart & Sons General Store. 1889. She looked up at him. There's more. The bank has their name, the gas station, the grocery store, everything. James looked at the list, then at his daughter, then at the historical display on the wall behind her that he had walked past 100 times and never really seen. A black and white photograph of a man in a suit standing in front of a general store. The sign above the door read, Hart & Sons, 1889. Below it, a brass plaque. The Hart family has been the cornerstone of Millbrook's development for over 130 years. From mining to agriculture to modern commercial development, the Hart legacy continues to shape our community. James felt his chest tighten, not anger, but discomfort at the asymmetry. She doesn't just own the estate. Emily shook her head. She owns the whole town. They drove home in silence. Emily drew in her notebook. James thought about Victoria, standing by the fence line saying, because 11 days wasn't enough time. He thought about Stephen's careful politeness, about Brian's initial dismissiveness followed by sudden deference, about the way everyone at the estate moved around Victoria like she was more than a client, like she was infrastructure. Monday morning, James arrived at the estate at 6:45 and found Stephen waiting at the carriage house with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was harder to read than usual. We need to talk. James took the coffee. About the East Line? About Miss Hart? James waited. Stephen looked at him for a long moment, then seemed to arrive at a decision. Why didn't anyone tell me who she really is? Stephen's jaw tightened. Tell you what? That Victoria Hart owns this entire town, the school my daughter attends, the bank, the library, everything. Stephen set his coffee down, because the last 3 men who knew that information up front, he counted on his fingers. One sued her for $2 million after a 6-month relationship, claimed emotional distress and breach of implied financial partnership. Case was thrown out, but it cost her 18 months of legal fees and tabloid coverage. 2. Sold their story to a lifestyle magazine. My year with the secret heiress, she had to move her primary residence to Denver for 8 months, until it blew over. 3. Proposed after 2 weeks because he wanted access to her board seats at Hart Holdings. She found the emails he'd sent to his business partner outlining the acquisition strategy. Stephen picked up his coffee again. So you see, Mr. Anderson, we don't lead with that information. I'm not those men. Prove it how? Finish the fence. Take your payment. Leave. And if I don't want to leave, then you'd better be prepared for what comes with loving someone who owns a $400 million portfolio. The number landed in the space between them. 400 million. James had known she was wealthy. He had not known the scale. There's something else. Stephen pulled a folder from his briefcase, opened it, slid a document across the table. This is a copy of the Hart Family Trust, established by Victoria's grandfather, Edward Hart, in 2011, 3 years before he died. What am I looking at? Section 12, subsection C. James read it, then read it again. If Victoria marries before age 35, she loses controlling interest in Hart Holdings. Stephen nodded. She retains 30% equity. Considerable wealth by any measure. But decision-making power transfers to the board of directors. 5 seats. Currently 3 are held by family members who resent that Edward chose Victoria over them. 2 are independent directors who've been trying to oust her since she took over at 27. Why would her grandfather do that? Stephen closed the folder. Edward Hart watched his daughter, Victoria's mother, marry 3 times, each time to a man who wanted the money more than the woman. He watched Victoria grow up in boarding schools because her mother was too busy managing divorces. When Edward's daughter died in a skiing accident in Aspen, Victoria was 8 years old. Edward raised her himself, and he was terrified she'd repeat her mother's mistakes, so he built a cage. Stephen looked at James evenly. He built a test. Wait until you're old enough to know the difference between love and greed. That's what he told her when he explained the clause. She's 32. 3 years left. James looked at the document again. The words were clinical, legal, but underneath them was the shape of a man who loved his granddaughter and didn't trust the world not to hurt her. And you're telling me this, why? Because Miss Hart has been burned, repeatedly, by men who saw dollar signs instead of a person, and because I've been managing this estate for 6 years, and I've never seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you. Which means what? Stephen stood. Which means you'd better know what you're doing, because if you're not serious, you'll hurt her, and if you are serious, pursuing her puts her legacy at risk. He picked up his briefcase. Either way, you're a problem. James sat in the carriage house office for 10 minutes. Then he got up and went to find Victoria. She was in the garden behind the main house. Not gardening, just standing among the dormant rose bushes with her arms crossed, looking at nothing, or everything. James stopped at the edge of the flagstone path. I don't care about your money, she turned. I care that you didn't trust me enough to tell the truth. Her eyes flashed. How could I trust you? Every man I've ever known wanted something from me. My wealth, my name, my connections, my influence. I wanted coffee. I wanted to know why you stood at that window watching me work. Her eyes reddened. Because you handed your daughter a paper bird like it was the most important thing in the world. And I've never had anyone in my entire life look at me that way. Like I was the most important thing. The silence stretched. James took a step forward. What happens when you turn 35? The clause expires. I can marry without penalty. 3 years, yes. I have a 9-year-old daughter who's been through enough loss. I won't put her in the middle of something complicated. Victoria's voice dropped. I know, but there was no but. Just the space where one might have been. Friday evening. Mercer's Diner. Would you and Emily still come? James hesitated, not because he didn't want to, because he did, which was precisely the problem. She'll ask you a lot of questions. She asks everyone a lot of questions. Good. I like people who ask questions. I'll see you Friday. Victoria nodded, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she turned back to the garden, and James walked back to the fence line, where the work was waiting. Friday came the way Fridays do, when you've spent the week thinking about them, slowly. And then all at once, Mercer's Diner sat on Main Street between the hardware store and the pharmacy. Red vinyl booths, checkered floor, the smell of coffee and pie that had been the same since James moved to Millbrook 6 years ago. He and Emily arrived first, took the corner booth. Emily faced the door, a habit she'd picked up from James, who always sat facing the entrance, which was a habit he'd never fully explained to her, and which came from years of work in places where knowing who was coming through the door was the difference between safe and not. She opened her notebook on the table. Are you nervous? Why would I be nervous? Because you keep checking your watch. I'm not checking my watch. You checked it 3 times since we sat down. James put his hands flat on the table. I'm not nervous. Emily looked at him with her mother's eyes. It's okay if you are. The door opened. Victoria came in. She spotted them immediately, crossed the diner, slid into the booth across from them. Emily looked up. You're the fence lady. I am. And you're the drawer. How do you know I draw? Because I kept your drawing, the one of the fence line from the first day. Emily went very still. Then she turned to a page in the middle of her notebook, slid it across the table. It was the estate drawn from the north approach, the fence line, the gravel road, the main house in the background, and in the corner, barely visible, a woman standing at an upstairs window. Victoria looked at it for a long time. I saw you. Emily said it simply that first day. I always draw what I see. James picked up his coffee cup. He looked out the window at the October evening. At the town that was not so small when you knew it right. At the streetlight coming on early, the way it did when the days were getting shorter. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Emily was already asking Victoria about the estate. How many rooms? 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a library, a study, 2 living rooms, a formal dining room that seats 20. Do you use all of them? Victoria's smile was small. No, have you ever gotten lost? Once. When I first moved in, I was 8 years old. My grandfather found me in the wine cellar. I'd been down there for an hour thinking I was in the basement storage. Why did you move in when you were 8? Victoria glanced at James. He gave a small nod. My mother died. My grandfather raised me. Emily absorbed this. My mom died too. When I was 4. I know. How do you know? Your father told me. Emily looked at James, then back at Victoria. Do you miss your mom? Every day. Me too, the conversation continued. Victoria answered each question with the exact level of seriousness it deserved. She did not talk down to Emily. She did not deflect. She treated a 9-year-old like a person whose questions mattered. Which is the correct way to talk to someone who asks real questions? The waitress brought pie. James cut Emily's slice diagonally. Victoria watched. Why do you always do that? Emily answered before James could. Because everything tastes better that way. Victoria smiled. Your father is right. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, then Emily said, Are you going to keep seeing my dad, Emily? James's voice carried a warning. But Victoria held up a hand. It's okay. She looked at Emily. I'd like to, if that's all right with you. Why does it matter if it's all right with me? Because you're the most important person in his life. And if you're not comfortable, then it doesn't matter what I want. Emily considered this. Are you going to be mean to him? Never. Are you going to leave? Victoria's voice was very steady. Not if I can help it. Okay then. Emily went back to her pie. James looked at Victoria across the table. She looked back. And something passed between them that did not need words. After dinner, they walked Emily to the truck. She climbed in, buckled her seatbelt, leaned out the window. I like her, Daddy. I'm glad. She's not like the other people in town. She doesn't treat you like you're small. No, she doesn't. Emily pulled her head back in. James closed the door, turned to Victoria. Thank you for what? For being honest with her. She's remarkable, she is. You've done a good job. James looked at the truck, at his daughter visible through the windshield with her notebook already open again. I've done my best. That's all any of us can do. They stood in the parking lot. The October evening was cool and getting cooler. Victoria pulled her jacket tighter. I should go. Victoria, she stopped. I meant what I said, about the 3 years. I won't be the reason you lose your legacy. And I meant what I said, about not leaving, if I can help it. So what do we do? She looked at him with eyes that were clear and honest and unafraid. We take it slow. We're careful. We don't make promises we can't keep. Can you do that? Can you? James thought about it. I can, then so can I. She got in her car, a black Range Rover that had probably cost more than James made in 2 years. She rolled down the window. Monday, 9 a.m. East Fence Line. I'll be there. Bring coffee. He smiled. I will. She drove away. James got in the truck. Emily looked at him. You're humming, am I? You haven't hummed in a long time. Since when? Since Mom. James stopped, looked at his daughter. Is that okay? She smiled. Rebecca's smile. That's very okay. 3 weeks passed. October turned to November. The East Fence Line went up the same way the North Line had. Plumb. Level. 2 inches deeper than speck. James and Victoria fell into a rhythm that felt both new and inevitable. Coffee on Mondays when he arrived. Lunch at Mercer's on Fridays. Always with Emily. Once Victoria came to his house. Saw the workshop, the organized tools, the careful life he'd built. Once James went to the estate for dinner. Saw the 12 empty bedrooms. The echoing hallways. The loneliness dressed as luxury. They were careful. They were slow. They were falling. And then Emily came home from school crying. James was in the workshop when he heard the front door slam. He came out to find her sitting on the couch with her face in her hands, her notebook on the floor. He sat beside her, waited. What happened? She wouldn't talk at first. Then, Kayla said, you're a gold digger. James went very still. What? She said, you're dating Miss Hart for her money. She said, we're going to get rich and leave town. Who is Kayla? Kayla Hart. She says Miss Victoria is her cousin. James felt his jaw tighten. What did you say? I told her you don't care about money. You only care about me. But she told everyone at recess. And now nobody will sit with me at lunch. Emily looked up at him with red eyes. Is it true? Are you with Miss Victoria because she's rich? No. Then why does Kayla think that? Because people in this town think they own Miss Victoria. And they don't like that she's spending time with someone they don't know. Are we going to leave? James pulled her close. I don't know yet. But that night after Emily went to bed, James sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Looking at nothing, thinking about everything. The next morning he drove to Hart Elementary, asked to speak with the principal. Margaret Chen was 52. Grey hair, kind eyes, and the careful diplomatic manner of someone who had spent 30 years navigating small-town politics. Mr. Anderson. Please sit. James sat. My daughter was bullied yesterday. I'm aware. I spoke with both girls. Kayla has been spoken to. James kept his voice even. She called my daughter a gold digger's kid. That's not a phrase a 9-year-old comes up with on her own. Principal Chen folded her hands. The Hart family has deep roots in this community, Mr. Anderson. Feelings are complicated when it comes to Miss Victoria's personal life. My daughter is 9 years old. She doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in town politics. I agree, but Millbrook is a small town. And the Harts, they're not just a family here. They're the foundation. This building is named after them. Half the children's parents work for Hart Holdings in some capacity. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I'll do everything I can to protect Emily. But I can't control what happens outside these walls. And in a town this size, outside these walls is everywhere. James stood. Thank you for your time. He left, drove home, and made a decision. That evening he started packing. Emily watched from the doorway of her room. Are we leaving? We're going to Montana. I have a contact there. Carpentry work. Good schools. Because of the fence lady. James knelt down. Because this town isn't big enough for you to be yourself. You deserve better. But you like her. I do. And she likes you. She does. Then why does that mean we have to leave? James didn't have an answer, so he just held his daughter and kept packing. At 7:30 there was a knock on the door. James opened it. Victoria stood there. Stephen called me. James stepped aside. She came in, saw the boxes, saw Emily's room half empty through the open door. You're running. I'm protecting my daughter. She's 9. She doesn't deserve to be called names at school because I'm dating someone the town thinks is untouchable. Victoria's voice was very quiet. What if I gave it all up? James stared. The trust, the board seats, the controlling interest. What if I triggered the clause and married you anyway? Victoria, I'm 32. I'd lose decision-making power at Hart Holdings until I'm 35. But I'd keep 30% equity, still millions. Enough to live on, enough to be free. I would never let you do that. Why not? Because you'd resent me eventually. You'd wake up at 45 and realize you gave up your legacy. Your grandfather's legacy. For a man who fixes fences. I won't be the reason you lose yourself. Victoria started crying. The first time in years. Everyone in my life wants me to be Victoria Hart the heiress. The name. The portfolio. The foundation. You're the only person who wants me to stay Victoria Hart. Who doesn't want me to give anything up. James held her. Because I love you. And love doesn't ask you to become less than you are. Silence. Then what do we do? Victoria's voice was muffled against his shoulder. No. Emily walked into the living room. My mom told my dad something before she died. I heard it through the hospital door. Emily James's voice carried a warning. But Emily kept going. She said, don't stop living because I'm gone. Find someone who makes you remember what happy feels like. Emily looked at Victoria. You make him happy. I can tell because he hums when he makes breakfast now. He didn't hum for 4 years. Victoria knelt down to Emily's eye level. What if people are mean to you because of me? Then we move to a town where people aren't mean. Emily's voice was certain. But you have to come with us. Because Daddy hums when you're around. And I like it when he hums. Victoria looked at James. James looked at Victoria. And something settled between them. Not a decision, but the shape of one. That night after Emily went to bed, Victoria made a call. Stephen, I'm triggering the clause. Silence on the other end, Miss Hart. Please reconsider. I'm 32 years old. I'll regain control at 35. 3 years is not forever. But losing James and Emily? That would be another long silence. Your grandfather would have hated this decision. Victoria looked at James across the small kitchen. My grandfather died alone in a 12-bedroom house, Stephen. I'm choosing differently. She hung up. James came to stand beside her. Are you sure? No. But I'm certain. What's the difference? Sure means you know the outcome. Certain means you know the choice is right, even if you don't know how it ends. She took his hand. I've never been more certain of anything. The Hart Holdings board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning. Victoria told James about it on Sunday. They were sitting in his kitchen. Emily was at a friend's house. The first friend she'd made since the incident with Kayla Hart, a girl named Sophie, whose parents had moved to Millbrook 3 months ago and didn't know anything about the Hart legacy or town politics or why a 9-year-old shouldn't be friends with the fence man's daughter. I'm telling them tomorrow. Victoria's coffee sat untouched in front of her. About us, about the clause, about my intention to marry, about the transfer of controlling interest. How long have you been planning this? Since the night Emily told me about her mother. That was 3 days ago. I know this is fast. James kept his voice even, not trying to talk her out of it, just naming the thing. I've spent 5 years being slow, being careful, watching every man who approached me for signs that he wanted the portfolio instead of the person. And in 5 years, not one of them passed the test. She looked at him. You didn't even know there was a test, because there wasn't one. Not with you. What's different? You gave your daughter the warm side of the truck. You cut her sandwich diagonally. You made her a paper bird at a red light because she asked and you'd forgotten. Those aren't things you do when you're performing. Those are things you do when you're just living. Victoria reached across the table, took his hand. I'm not giving anything up, James. I'm choosing something more important. The board won't see it that way. The board can go to hell. He almost smiled. Almost what happens after. After I trigger the clause, I retain 30% equity, roughly 120 million in assets. I keep my board seat but lose veto power. The other 5 directors make all major decisions until I turn 35. And then I get it back. All of it. 3 years. Can you wait 3 years? Can you? He thought about it. I've waited 5 years to feel like this again. 3 more doesn't scare me. She smiled. Good, there's something else. What? We can't stay in Millbrook. I know, where do we go? Emily wants to see mountains. Real mountains. Not these. She gestured out the window at the Rockies in the distance. Those are real mountains. She wants bigger. James thought about the maps Emily had been studying. The national parks she'd circled. The elevations she'd written in the margins of her notebook, Montana. Or Wyoming. Somewhere the Hart name doesn't open doors or close them. Somewhere we're just people. I have a contact in Ridgemont. About 40 miles north of here. Small town, good schools. He owns a construction company. Been trying to recruit me for 2 years. Victoria nodded. Ridgemont, it's not much. Neither is this. And we've been happy here. James looked at her. You've never been happy here. No. But I could be happy there. With you, with Emily. What about your work? I'm opening my own firm. Hart Structural Consulting. I already filed the LLC paperwork. I'm hiring you as chief engineer. I don't have. You have a degree from Colorado State. You have 6 years at Bridgepoint. You have a Hurricane Ida levee project with your name in the engineering records. You have an International Civil Engineering Society fellowship that you never claimed. You're more qualified than anyone I could hire. What's the pay? She told him. He blinked. That's market rate for someone with your experience, plus project bonuses, plus equity stake if the firm grows. Victoria, we're doing this right. I'm not playing at having a business. I have clients already. 3 referrals from former Hart Holdings projects. I'm serious about this. I can see that. So I'll take the job. She smiled. It was the smile he'd seen that first day on the fence line. The real one. Good. When do we leave? After the board meeting. After I sign the papers. After we tell Emily. We already told Emily. We told her we were thinking about it. Now we tell her it's happening. When? Tonight. When you pick her up from Sophie's. You want to come? Victoria shook her head. This is a father-daughter conversation. I'll see her after. You're part of this now. I know. But some things still belong to just you and her. He loved her for that. Didn't say it, but she saw it anyway. The board meeting happened in a conference room at the Hart Holdings office in downtown Denver, 90 minutes from Millbrook. Victoria drove. James stayed home with Emily. She called him at 11:30. It's done. How did they take it? Poorly. Richard Caldwell threatened to contest the trust terms. Said my grandfather would be ashamed. Margaret Reynolds asked if I was pregnant. Thomas Hart, my cousin, asked if you'd signed a prenuptial agreement yet. Jesus. I told them the truth, that I was in love, that I was getting married, that the clause was clear and legal and I was executing it voluntarily. What did Stephen say? Stephen submitted his resignation. What? Effective immediately. He said he'd spent 6 years protecting me from exactly this kind of decision, and he couldn't watch me make it. Victoria's voice was steady, but underneath it James could hear the cost. I'm sorry, don't be. He was protecting the estate, not me. There's a difference. What happens now? Now I hire a new property manager. I sign the transfer documents. I start my firm. I marry you. She paused. Unless you're having second thoughts. I'm not good, because I already put a deposit on a venue in Ridgemont. You what? Small ceremony. Just us and Emily. Justice of the peace. I thought December, before Christmas. Emily said she wanted snow. You asked Emily about the wedding? I asked Emily what kind of wedding she thought we should have. She said small, with pie instead of cake, and snow. Pie instead of cake. She has strong opinions. She gets that from her mother, and from you. Victoria's voice softened. I'm coming over tonight, after I finish with the lawyers. I want to see both of you. We'll be here, James. Yeah? Thank you. For not trying to stop me. I would never stop you from being who you are. I know. That's why I love you. She hung up. James stood in his kitchen holding the phone and thought, this is real. This is happening. This is my life now. Emily came home at 4. Sophie's mom dropped her off, waved from the car and drove away without coming to the door. Which meant she either didn't know who James was or didn't care. Both options were fine. Emily came in with her backpack and her notebook, and an expression that James had learned meant she had questions. Is Miss Victoria moving in? Not yet. But soon? How soon? A few weeks. Maybe a month. Are we moving too? Yes. Where? A town called Ridgemont, about 40 miles north. We'll still be in Colorado. Still see the mountains. But it'll be a new school, new house, new everything. Emily sat down at the kitchen table, opened her notebook, drew a line down the center of a blank page, wrote on one side, things I'll miss, on the other, things I won't miss. Under, things I'll miss, she wrote, Sophie, Mrs. Garfield, the library. Under, things I won't miss, she wrote, Kayla Hart, the mean kids. Everyone knowing everything. She looked up. Can Sophie visit? Of course. Can I take my books from the library? We'll get a library card at the new library. Will Miss Victoria be there? She'll be there. She's coming with us. Emily added something to the things I'll miss column, then crossed it out, moved it to the other side, this house. She tapped the page. I'll miss this house, but I won't miss being here without her. What do you mean? When it was just us, it was okay. But now that she's here sometimes, the house feels wrong when she's gone, like something's missing. James sat down across from her. I know what you mean. So we should go where she can always be here. Yeah, we should. Okay then. She closed the notebook. When do we tell her? Tell her what? That we want her to come. We already told her. No, we told her we were thinking about it. We should tell her we decided. When did you decide? When Sophie's mom asked me what my dad does, and I said he builds things that last. And then I thought about Miss Victoria, and I thought she's the kind of person who lasts too. James felt his throat tighten. You're 9 years old. I know. You're not supposed to be this smart. Mom was smart. You're smart. It's genetics. He laughed, actually laughed. Which felt good, which felt right. Okay. We'll tell her tonight. Victoria arrived at 7. Knocked even though James had told her she didn't need to. Emily opened the door, we decided. Victoria blinked. Decided what? That we want you to come with us. To Ridgemont. And we want you to stay. Not visiting. Staying. Victoria looked at James. He nodded. What she said, Victoria knelt down. Eye level with Emily, are you sure? Emily held up her notebook, showed Victoria the list. Things I'll miss. Things I won't miss. I moved you from one side to the other. That means you're staying. Victoria's eyes went bright. She pulled Emily into a hug, and James watched them. These two people who had found each other through a fence and a drawing and a paper bird. And he thought, Rebecca would have loved this. Rebecca would have loved her. The move happened faster than anyone expected. James gave notice on the rental house. Found a place in Ridgemont through his contact at the construction company. Small, 3 bedrooms. Garage with space for a workshop. Gravel driveway. The heater worked on both sides. Victoria sold the Hart estate. Not to family, not to the board. To a conservation trust that would turn it into a public park. The news hit Millbrook like a bomb. Half the town was outraged. Half was relieved. All of it was loud. James stayed out of it, focused on packing. On Emily's school transfer paperwork. On the logistics of moving a life from one place to another. Victoria handled the lawyers, the board meetings, the family fights. She came to James's house every night looking exhausted. And every night he made her tea. And every night she sat at his kitchen table and unwound. Richard Caldwell is filing an injunction. On what grounds? Undue influence. He's claiming you manipulated me into triggering the clause. That's insane, that's Richard. What did your lawyer say? That it won't hold. The trust language is clear. I'm over 18. I'm of sound mind. I'm acting voluntarily. There's no legal basis. But it'll take time, probably 6 months to resolve. Can you wait 6 months to marry me? She smiled. I've waited 32 years to feel like this. 6 months is nothing. What about the firm? Already operational. I have an office in Ridgemont. Signed the lease yesterday. Hired an office manager. Filed for state contractor licensing. You work fast. I've spent 5 years working slow. I'm done with slow. James reached across the table. Took her hand. Are you scared? Terrified. Of what? Of this not being real. Of waking up and finding out I imagined it. It's real. How do you know? Because I'm terrified too. Of what? Of not being enough. Of you realizing 3 years from now that you gave up an empire for a man who builds fences. James. Her voice was firm. You don't build fences. You build foundations. There's a difference. He looked at her and saw in her eyes the same thing he saw in Emily's Gomersil certainty. The kind you can't fake. The kind that holds. December came with snow. Real snow. The kind that makes Colorado look like a postcard. James and Emily moved to Ridgemont on the 5th. Victoria moved on the 6th. Not into James's house. Into an apartment downtown. 2 blocks from her new office. Because they weren't married yet. And because some things are worth doing right, the wedding was scheduled for December 20th. 2 weeks away. Emily was the only witness they needed. But Victoria invited Sophie, and James invited his contact from the construction company. And somehow 2 people became 6, which felt right. Which felt like the start of something. The courthouse in Ridgemont was small. Built in 1892, red brick, white trim. A bell tower that still worked. James wore a suit he'd bought in Denver, navy blue, nothing fancy. But new Victoria wore a dress the color of winter sky. Still, no train, no veil, just her, which was all he wanted anyway. Emily wore red, her choice. She said red was a happy color. And she wanted everyone to know this was a happy day. The justice of the peace was a woman named Carol Henderson, 65. Gray hair in a bun, reading glasses on a chain. She'd been performing ceremonies for 30 years. And she'd seen everything. But she smiled when she saw them. Because some things you can just tell. Dearly beloved, she started. And James stopped listening to the words. Started listening to the moment. The sound of Emily's breathing beside him. The weight of Victoria's hand in his. The December light coming through the courthouse windows. The snow falling outside. Do you, Victoria Margaret Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Do you, James Robert Anderson? Take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Carol smiled. You may kiss the bride. James kissed Victoria. And Emily clapped, and Sophie whistled, and the construction company owner took a photo on his phone. And just like that, it was done. They were married. The reception was at Mercer's Diner. Not the one in Millbrook. A different Mercer's in Ridgemont. Same red vinyl booths. Same checkered floor, same smell of coffee and pie. But different. Better because it was theirs. The owner, Ray Mercer, had closed the diner for the afternoon, set up one long table, put out pie instead of cake, apple, cherry, pumpkin, pecan. Emily's request, they ate, they laughed, they toasted with coffee because nobody wanted champagne. And at some point James looked around the table, at his daughter, at his wife, at the people who had shown up for them, and he thought, this is what I built. Not a bridge, not a levee, not a structure that would outlast me. This, a family, a life, a foundation that holds. 3 weeks later, Victoria's phone rang at 2 in the morning. James woke to the sound of her voice in the dark, low, tense. When a pause, how bad? Another pause, I'm on my way. She hung up. James sat up. What happened? Richard Caldwell had a heart attack. He's in ICU in Denver. Is he going to make it? They don't know. Do you need to go? She looked at him. He's spent 6 months trying to destroy me. Calling me reckless, irresponsible, claiming I'm unfit to run my own life. James waited, and he's also my grandfather's oldest friend. The only person alive who knew Edward before the money, before the empire, before everything. You should go, she nodded. Will you come with me? Of course. They drove to Denver in the dark, arrived at the hospital at 4:30. Margaret Reynolds was already there, and Thomas Hart, and Stephen Collins, who looked up when Victoria walked in. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Miss Hart, Stephen. I'm glad you came. He's asking for you. Richard Caldwell looked smaller than Victoria remembered. Pale, thin, old in a way he hadn't been 6 months ago. She sat beside his bed. James waited outside. Richard opened his eyes. You came. Of course I came. I've been terrible to you. Yes, you have. Edward would have hated what I did. Probably. But he would have understood why. Victoria took his hand. You were protecting his legacy. Richard's voice was weak. I was protecting the wrong thing. He didn't build that company for the company. He built it for you. She felt tears start. I know, and you gave it up for love. That's what he wanted. That's what he always wanted for you. Richard squeezed her hand. I'm sorry. I know. Did you marry him? I did. Is he good to you? He's the best man I know. Then I'm happy for you. He closed his eyes. Thank you for coming. Victoria stayed until he fell asleep. Then she went to find James. He was in the waiting room, raiding a 2-year-old magazine about fishing. How is he? Stable. They think he'll pull through. Good. He apologized for what? Everything. She sat beside him, leaned against his shoulder. I'm tired, I know. Can we go home? James kissed the top of her head. Yeah, we can go home. February came. Emily turned 10. They had a party at the house. Sophie came, and 3 other kids from her new school, and Victoria baked a cake, which was lopsided, but tasted good. Emily blew out the candles, made a wish, wouldn't tell anyone what it was. Later that night, after everyone left, Victoria found Emily in her room. Can I come in? Emily nodded. Victoria sat on the bed. What are you drawing? Our family. She turned the notebook around. It was the 3 of them, standing in front of the house in Ridgemont. Mountains in the background, snow on the ground. It was perfect. The perspective, the proportions, the light, all of it. You're really talented. Emily shrugged. I just draw what I see. What do you see? Emily looked at the drawing, then at Victoria home. Victoria's throat tightened. Yeah. Me too. March brought the first signs of spring. And news from Denver. The injunction was dismissed. Richard Caldwell withdrew his complaint. The board voted to accept Victoria's resignation as controlling director, and to honor her seat as board member with equity stake. Everything was settled. Everything was legal. Everything was done. Victoria got the call on a Tuesday, told James that night. It's over.
How do you feel?
Free. She said it with wonder, like she'd been holding her breath for 6 months, and could finally exhale. What happens now? Now we build the firm, everything. Hart's Structural Consulting landed its first major contract in April. A bridge replacement project for the Colorado Department of Transportation. $12 million. 2-year timeline. James was lead engineer. Victoria was project manager. They worked together. In the office Victoria had built, with the team she'd hired, and it was hard, and it was good, and it was theirs. Emily started drawing bridges, studying load calculations, asking James questions about stress points and material tolerances. She was 10 years old, and already thinking like an engineer. Victoria watched her, and thought, Rebecca would be proud, and thought, I'm proud too. May came with Emily's school art show. She'd entered 3 drawings. One of the fence at the Hart estate, one of the courthouse on the wedding day, one of James working on the bridge project. All 3 won awards. Victoria stood in the elementary school gymnasium looking at Emily's work on the walls. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. Not because of her name, not because of her money, but because of this family, this life, this choice. James came to stand beside her. She's good. She's great. She gets it from you. Victoria shook her head. She gets it from Rebecca, and from you. I'm just lucky to be here to see it. You're not lucky. James's voice was firm. She chose you. I chose you. That's not luck. That's love. Victoria turned to him. I never thought I'd have this. Have what? A family that sees me. Not the money. Not the name. Just me. We see you. I know. She kissed him. Right there in the middle of the elementary school gymnasium, with parents and teachers and kids everywhere. And she didn't care who saw. Because for the first time in her life, she had nothing to hide. June brought Victoria's 33rd birthday. They celebrated quietly. Dinner at home. Emily made a card, drew a picture of Victoria on the inside, wearing a hard hat, standing in front of a bridge, with the caption, Best boss, best mom, best everything. Victoria cried happy tears. The kind that means something broke open in a good way. James gave her a gift, small box. She opened it. Inside was a pair of work gloves. Leather. Well-made, practical. I know you have gloves. I do. But these are different. How? He pointed to the inside of the left glove. embroidered in small letters. Heart Structural Consulting. CEO, you're not just the owner, you're building things. You should have the tools. She put them on. They fit perfectly. How did you know my size? I pay attention. She kissed him. Thank you. For the gloves, for seeing me. I always have. I know. That's why I love you. Julie brought the news. Richard Caldwell died. Peacefully in his sleep. At 78, Victoria went to the funeral. James and Emily came with her. They sat in the back. Didn't speak. Just witnessed. Stephen Collins gave the eulogy. Talked about Richard's loyalty, his integrity, his love for Edward Hart, his complicated relationship with Victoria. And at the end, Stephen said, Richard made mistakes, we all do. But he spent his last months trying to make them right. That's all any of us can hope for. After the service, Stephen found Victoria. He looks good on you. What does? Happiness. Victoria smiled. It feels good too. Edward would be proud. You think so? I know so. He wanted you to choose love, you did. Everything else was just noise. Stephen held out his hand. She shook it. And something that had been broken for 6 months, healed. August came, and with it, a letter from the Hart Holdings Board, addressed to Victoria Hart Anderson. She opened it at the kitchen table, read it twice, then handed it to James. What is this? An offer for what? To buy back controlling interest, at market rate. Effective immediately. Why? Because the board is imploding. Thomas Hart was caught embezzling. Margaret Reynolds resigned. The 2 independent directors are fighting. They need someone who actually knows how to run the company. Are you going to take it? Victoria looked at the letter, at the number at the bottom, at the signature line. No. Why not? Because I built something better. Better than $400 million? Better than what someone else built for me. I built Hart Structural Consulting. Me. With you. With our team. And it's mine. Actually mine. Not inherited. Not given. Earned. She tore up the letter, dropped it in the trash. I'm not going back. James pulled her close. Good. September brought Emily's first day of 5th grade. She wore new shoes, carried her notebook, walked into the building without looking back. Victoria watched from the car. She's growing up. Yeah, does it scare you? Every day. James took her hand. But we're doing it together. That's what matters. Victoria nodded. That's what matters. October came full circle. 1 year since James had driven down the gravel road to the Hart estate. 1 year since the paper bird. 1 year since the fence. Victoria suggested they go back, just to see. They drove to Millbrook on a Saturday, parked outside the old estate, now a public park. The fence was still there, James's fence, still plumb, still level, still holding. Emily walked the line, ran her hand along the rails. You built this, Daddy. I did. It's still perfect, because it was built right. Victoria stood beside him, looking at the house, at the windows where she'd watched him work, at the gravel road where everything started. Do you miss it? No, not even a little. She turned to him. I miss who I was trying to be. But I like who I became. Who did you become? Someone who builds things with people she loves. Someone who cuts sandwiches diagonally. Someone who knows that home isn't a place. It's people. James kissed her, long, slow. Right there on the gravel road. And Emily took a picture, with her phone, for her notebook later. Because some moments you don't interrupt. Some moments you just let be. They drove back to Ridgemont as the sun set. And when they got home, there were boxes on the porch, 3 of them, from the Hart Holdings office in Denver. Victoria opened the first one, inside. Her grandfather's personal files, photos, letters, documents, and at the bottom, a handwritten note dated the week before Edward Hart died. It read, Victoria, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I hope I was wrong. I hope the clause didn't protect you from love. I hope it taught you to recognize it. Real love doesn't ask you to choose between yourself and someone else. It asks you to become more yourself. Find that, choose that, build that. I love you, always. Grandfather. Victoria read it 3 times, then handed it to James. He read it, looked at her. He knew. Knew what? That you'd choose right. She smiled through tears. I did choose right. Yes, you did. That night they sat together on the couch. Emily between them, drawing in her notebook, James reading, Victoria looking through her grandfather's files. And at some point Emily looked up. This is nice. What is this? All of us. Here, yeah, it is. Do you think we'll always be like this? Victoria looked at James. James looked at Emily. Not always. You'll grow up, go to college, build your own life. But we'll still be here. James's voice was certain. We'll always be here. Emily went back to her drawing, and Victoria leaned against James and thought, this is what I built, not an empire, not a legacy, not a name that opens doors. This, a family, a home, a life built right. The evening deepened. Snow began to fall outside, the first snow of the season. Emily finished her drawing, showed it to them. It was the three of them on the couch, exactly as they were. At the bottom, she had written, "My family, drawn from where I'm standing, because other ways aren't really what you saw." Victoria traced the lines with her finger. "You drew us perfectly. I draw what I see. What do you see?" Emily looked at Victoria, then at James, then back at the drawing. "People who stay." James felt his chest tighten. Victoria pulled Emily close. "Yeah, we stay." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside the house on the gravel road in Ridgemont, Colorado, three people sat together. A man who had once designed levees that held back storms. A woman who had once owned a town and chose to own her own life instead. A girl who drew the world exactly as it was. And in the quiet of that moment, in the warmth of that small house, in the presence of that particular love, James Anderson understood with absolute clarity what he had always known but could now finally name. That the fence had never been about the fence. It had been about finding someone who builds things that last. And this family, this foundation, this life they had chosen together, would last.